Welcome to the Great Beer State podcast from the Michigan Brewers Guild. The Great Beer State is a weekly show sharing conversations and stories from the passionate people who contribute to our vibrant Michigan beer community. It is made up of a mix between full-length archived interviews from the Guild's first documentary book project, A Rising Tide, Stories from the Michigan Brewers Guild, and conversations recorded in the here and now. Each episode is kicked off with a conversational update from host Scott Graham, Executive Director of the Guild, and the beer-evangelist Fred Biltman, author of A Rising Tide. Here's Scott and Fred. Welcome to Michigan's Great Beer State podcast. We're here in Season 2, Episode 4. Kicking things off, I'm here with my good friend Scott Graham, Executive Director of the Michigan Brewers Guild. Scott, welcome to Episode 4.
Yeah, hi, Fred. It's another fun interview today, and glad to be with you.
Yeah, likewise. We've got our good friend Mike Plesz from Rochester Mills as a interview from the archives, a part of the Rising Tide project. So we're sharing that conversation that happened in Kalamazoo in 2018. But before that, we'll get to updates and conversation about what's going around here in, we're in, well, really early March, 2021. So what do our members and lovers of Michigan beer need to hear these days?
Well, I'm not sure, but I know that I keep thinking of it being just about a full year of COVID madness, COVID mania, COVID-19 influence, which has been a big topic of conversation of ours throughout the podcast, and it's affected everybody in all kinds of different ways. And none of us ever thought we'd be talking about any of this or not much of it just a year ago.
Yeah, even as it rolled in, I don't know how many people, other than maybe some people in the science world that were wrestling the early stage of this. I don't think any of us would have guessed a year later we'd still be this deep in and have this much loss and catastrophe and chaos and shift and change than we've had in the last year. So it is bizarre. And now, we're just at that mark where you're starting to see the anniversary of the before days where we used to do things differently. And it was about this time when word started coming down that shit was getting real. So it's something else. It's very surreal. And guys, if nothing else, we send our best out to everybody who's had to, I think everybody we know and everybody I can think of has had to shoulder some sort of burden and change and discomfort from this. So our heart goes out to all of you, and we're hoping for better days and starting to see some shift in that direction. So looking forward.
Yeah, and there are certainly silver linings, as there are with anything. I think a little more time will help us hopefully look back and identify some of the positive things that came out of it. I don't mean to suggest that they're going to outweigh some of the negatives. But, some of the things we've shifted to virtually are going to have lasting effects that are going to be positive for a lot of us. I think, things that maybe I was resistant to a year ago that I was doing even before COVID, some of the meeting stuff and participation virtually is now so common. And it while it is a little tiring, I'll admit, it's a really useful tool, and it's a whole different way to engage. And I know that there are going to be other things that get looked back on, and we're going to think, wow, that really was a benefit. And anytime somebody gets stressed and challenged, it forces them to do more and be better. And some of that will be good too. So we're a very resilient community and creative community. So I think there will be good that comes out of it. And that's what I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can look at some of the to-go regulation and the relaxation of to-go in both beer and spirits. Um, and also the social districts allowing both enhanced outdoor dining and drinking for licensees, and then shared, the social district being that shared licensed area, um, or I don't know exactly how you'd call it, but a defined space for people to enjoy alcohol outdoors between licenses are things that I've had on the wish list forever, for a long time, and I think it would have been thought impossible not that long ago. And here it's out there. It may not be there forever, but I think communities are going to see things, have an opportunity to see things differently and explore a relationship with alcohol and outdoor, you know, experiences that are positive and could live on well past this situation. I hope, anyways.
Yeah, I've not had a beer in a social district yet. So I'll be looking forward to that experience at some point, probably this year.
Yeah, me too. Well, with that, we'll look forward to social districting together or apart, and we can jump into this episode's Brewers Dozen. You want to get us started and tell us about the region?
Yeah, I picked a region. We've been in the Grand Rapids area with our Brewers Dozen before, a couple of times actually, I think. And there's so many breweries there that what I did was I kind of bit off the piece that's just north of Grand Rapids and then stretched out a little bit to the east, starting with Comstock Park. And in Comstock Park, we've got 3 brewery members, one being the Elk Brewing tasting room and production facility, which is actually right across the road from the Whitecap Stadium, Fifth Third Ballpark, where we normally host our winter beer festival.
Yeah, and we just passed that that would be anniversary. So here we are into that is another year related milestone for sure. And then we've also got beer, the aptly named and sounding Beer Distillery, spelled Bier.
Yeah, it comes from a last name. And then also in Comstock Park, a little further away, is Perrin Brewing Company, which is a favorite of many.
Yeah, and then moseying on over to Grand Rapids proper, we've got Pink Barrel Cellars.
Yeah, I almost think that's not, it's a Grand Rapids address, but it's a farm kind of west of Comstock Park. But it is a Grand Rapids address. And if we travel north a little further to Rockford, in the Rockford community, I guess I would say, we've got 3 brewery members. The first one a little bit south of town and a little bit newer, but a really nice place, is Third Nature Brewing Company.
Yeah, next up we've got Rockford Brewing Company, which who I'm pretty sure laid the groundwork and broke the seal in Rockford. So they've been brewing a long time and got things rolling there on the river.
Yeah, and then Depot Number 36 Brewery is an offshoot of a longtime member of ours, the Jaden James Brewery. So that's one that's probably lesser known, so I'm happy to mention it.
All right. And then over in Sparta, you've got Brick House Brews.
And Cedar Springs Brewing Company in Cedar Springs, home of a very German-themed restaurant and brewery with lots of different beer styles.
And then over in Greenville, you've got Flat River Brewing Company.
Yeah, which interestingly enough shares a building with Psycho Brew, who makes a lot of brewing equipment that we see around in the small breweries in Michigan. And then
trivia.
Yeah, yeah. And the last one on the list today, we're reaching all the way east to Ionia, and last on the list today, but not least, is Steel Street Brewing in Ionia.
All right. So that's the Brewers Dozen, our tradition of giving shout outs through the member rolls of the Michigan Brewers Guild. So give them all a visit, a shout out, a taste, and check them out. Those are the wonderful members of our brewing community and guild. So now we would move on to introducing our guest for the week. Like we mentioned, coming in, this is an archived interview from the Rising Tide Project, and it's Mike Plesz, who was co-founder of Royal Oak and Detroit Beer Company and Rochester Mills. And then that ownership structure sort of divvied those up. So the Royal Oak and Detroit Beer Company have stayed in one group, and Rochester Mills is another. And I think that we didn't really cover that in the interview, but that might help you kind of understand the moving parts. So it was a really fun interview to listen to. I think Mike is a really sharp mind and was such a big help in those early days. And he talks about the forming days of the guild and the early festivals. And I thought it was a really interesting and different perspective from the other people we've heard from that same era.
I did too. And, Mike, of course, is very passionate and enthusiastic in anything that he does. And he's been part of the community for a long time. I would consider him one of the pioneers with, early in the brew pub business, successful operator. He helped a number of other breweries behind the scenes as kind of a consultant, and I think also as a friend, get going. So he's been a big part of the industry, and the companies that he's been involved with were instrumental in supporting the guild early on and for many years, and are still supportive.
Yeah, and I don't know if you would say this the same way or not, but I feel like he's been very instrumental in a lot of things, but his personality and sort of the way he works is often behind the scenes from a public point of view. So I think it's really interesting to pull some of these stories forward, because it isn't the same sort of branded personality that everybody knows, and yet he's been formative in many, many important things in our brewing community, like you said. So I love kind of getting those details out and helping people hear that story. When I think of those early festivals, he wasn't on the board, but he was certainly a big part of the duct tape that held the thing together. And I don't know if it would have been the same without him, or survived without him, is what I mean to
at
say.
Greenmead, Mike being behind the scenes in the building there, counting money, actually a pretty big part of the festival, although I don't know how much of the festival he got to see.
Maybe a porta-john once in a while. But yeah, so his commitment has been big, and I don't know. I think everybody should enjoy hearing this, and I think it's also, especially as we kind of are in a, rebuilding phase in a lot of ways, because we've been without festivals now for almost a year, and I think it's interesting to look back at where we started with those, where industry started, and how much we gained, not just from the festival revenue and the festival promotion, but from the strengthening of our community. And so working together on whatever's next as we move through this is the same opportunity. However many years later, 20 some years later, we have more, we have adversity in front of us, and yet we have the opportunity to strengthen through it. So hopefully this story lends a little encouragement that way. Here's Mike Plesz, Rochester Mills Brewing Company, from a talk we had in Kalamazoo in 2018. Take it away, Mike.
Cheers to Mike.
Mike, good to see you.
Good to see you, Fred.
Thanks for joining us.
Many years of fun.
Many years. So we've been basically trading old stories, talking about the brewing scene here in Michigan, which you've been part of for a long time, and the kind of history and arc of the Brewers Guild. So maybe you could start by just sharing, how did you come to be in the brewing industry in Michigan? How did it all get started for you?
Back in 1995, myself and Drew Cior opened up the Royal Oak Brewery, brew pub in downtown Royal Oak. And basically after that, started out, there was only a few of us back then.
Yeah. What gave you the idea? What was kind
trip
of...
out to California to visit my family. And Drew happened to be working at a brewery that my sister was working at. So had a couple beers there, had a couple porters, and next thing you know, came back, and for 2 years after that, it was all about home brewing and learning the business on a smaller level, and then talking them into moving back to Michigan to open up a brewery with us.
And so having that kind of, what did that trip tell you? Like what, besides you've had beers other places and not come back and developed a career. So was there something in California that spoke to you about what could be done here in Michigan, since it wasn't really happening yet very much here in Michigan?
No,
so
it wasn't.
What kind of lit the spark?
Well, the smaller scale pub was interesting to me. I did some trips up to Northern California to see Ken Grossman and Sierra Nevada. My wife's family's from that area, Chico, and saw what they were accomplishing out in Chico back in the early 90s. And didn't see much in Michigan, so it was, for me, it was not just the business aspect that I liked. I also liked the culture of it. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
People were fun,
Yeah. And did you feel like, did you see some building blocks of what, like, I guess I'm asking, how would you describe the terrain in Michigan? Did you see it completely absent and like a blank canvas, or did you see the building blocks that, here are the things that would make this go?
I saw a lot of blank stares from people.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah, completely foreign.
Because you opened in 95,
Yes.
which means you started planning prior to that.
Yes, and people did not grasp the concept. Even when we opened up, they come in, they're like, "You really brew beer here?" That was the most shocking thing to me, is that people really didn't understand the concept of a microbrewery or a brew pub.
I don't even think they understood that beer was made by someone.
Right. Absolutely.
It
came
just
out of the
showed
TV.
up in the store.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Like it regenerated on the shelf.
Yes. Yeah. There was a lot of that. I mean, we're talking many years of explaining, and our beer styles were fairly, remedial back then. The hop selections, non-existent. Yeast selections. I mean, I had to drive to Ohio once because we had a beer that wasn't fermenting all the way to get a champagne strain, to get it to ferment down further. So it was, access to ingredients, the style of ingredients, was nothing that it is today. It's crazy.
And another comparison today is that it seems different in number then, although in percentage it's remarkable where. So in 93, we had like 3 breweries in the state. By, I don't know if I'll get all the numbers right, but by 96 or 97, we were 30-something. And by the end of that decade, we were at 60. So, we doubled more than once. But the idea that 30 new breweries is a large number is kind of comical compared to today.
Yes.
But can you tell me what that felt like? What were your thoughts as you were part of early kind of movement that seemed like a beer rush of sorts, because several other businesses opened within a year or two of yours.
Yeah, there was quite a few.
So, as a fan of beer or as a business person, what did that feel confirming? Did it feel scary? Did it feel exciting?
To me, it felt confirming. Having somebody else out there helping educate the consumer at that time, to me, was extremely important.
Yeah.
So the boom that we saw in 95, I was welcoming it. I was traveling around the state and exploring the new breweries. It's a lot easier back then because there wasn't one opening up every week.
Yeah, a few more miles, but a little easier to track
exactly. And I believe the people that got into the industry back then were, they were getting into it for all the right reasons. And I'm not saying that they aren't today, but it's just so many breweries for me to get around to that, I can't really I don't have the time to.
But that
do
was a hallmark of that part of the rush was that when you traveled around and connected to them, or at least I'm paraphrasing what I'm hearing, is that you also ran into like-minded people who were like,
Absolutely.
"Oh, you're doing this too. Great."
Yeah, we were on the same boat.
Yeah.
You know, some of us were kind of
You're
looking at each other.
terrified too.
Yeah. Some of us were kind of looking at each other like, "You're in this too," and and we helped each other out a lot, ingredients and stuff like that. There's a lot of that happening nowadays still too.
So you opened in '95, which meant you were kicking around for a couple years prior to that, and then do you recall what your first memory of the guild coming into focus was?
Yes, it was actually. I opened up Royal Oak Brewery with Drew, Rochester Mills Beer Company with Drew in '98. So it was shortly after that the guild, or around that time that the guild we were having a meeting, and I remember Rex Halfpenny. He was actually working for us, doing some marketing for us at the breweries, and he was our marketing director.
That I remember.
So we all got together and jumped in our car and drove up to.
He was at your place during that infamous meeting in Saginaw?
Yes.
I forgot all about that.
He was helping out a little bit, and then he came on full time for a while with us. But that meeting I'll never forget that meeting. It was interesting. A lot of people with a lot of emotion. And I think we were all very, we all really knew what we wanted, but we didn't know how we were going to get there.
Yeah.
The ultimate goal, was to promote Michigan beer. Whether we had the guild or not, we accomplished that. The guild, I think, kind of kept us together for a lot longer period initially, because we could have fragmented it easily back in, the late 90s. There was a lot of breweries that went out of business that people don't talk about. We had a boom and then a bust in the late 90s.
Yeah. What else do you take away from that meeting? You talk about a lot of emotion. What were some of your sense of what was going on in the room?
I think that kind of weeded out people that were in it just for capital, for making money.
Yeah.
I think that was, you could tell who was in the room, who really wanted to make, Michigan a birthplace for craft beer. And some people just wanted to make money. But the education, the commitment behind the brand that you developed, I think, that in that room, there was a lot of people that to this day are very successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember feeling like it was partly the way you shared it made me start thinking like, I hadn't thought of this metaphor before, but it reminded me like a first dance where like everybody's nervous, standing on the edge of the room. They're there because they want what people said was going to be there, but there was a lot of sort of excited anxiety, and
I think people were scared to say what they really wanted out of it.
Yeah, and nervous to. I think that also, I think one of the things we have today that we didn't have then is that we trust each other. It may not be everybody, and it may not be even entirely all the time, but there's a lot of trust in the community that we got from knowing one another. And you think about that first meeting. That hadn't been developed.
No.
So we could want it, we could think this is a good idea, but I feel like we didn't really have a bearing for how much we could put out, how much we could risk in the room with our supposed competitors that we were being told we should be competing against.
A lot of egos in that room.
Yeah.
There was a lot of founder syndrome. Like the founder being in a room with a bunch of other founders, and at the end of the day,
joiners.
Doesn't always work that way. There's a reason why we all started our own individual businesses. But at that time, you're right. It was like a first dance. People were sitting around the outside, and every once in a while, you get somebody that stand up and say what they envisioned it to be. But it really came down to our whole goal was the same thing.
Yeah.
We were in this business together, whether we were friends or not at that time. We developed to be friends later on, but at that time, we had to trust each other. We were going to basically take our sweat equity and our people's time to put into this to help everybody in the future. And that's, to me, that's the difference between the original people that started the guild and later on, is that it didn't benefit us. didn't benefit us.
Right.
It benefited a lot of the people who came on later on.
Yeah, that's a good point.
We kind of, built this big ship and, put on all the nice finishes in it, and people came on the ship and they're enjoying it. And that's what it was about. To me, that's what it was about, was creating that environment. And, my kids or other kids in the future might be able to benefit from that. And I'm fine with that.
And did you feel a sense of importance towards what we were doing for the marketplace, what we were doing for our own sort of industry locker room, for lack of a better word, for our own industry community? Were we working towards, how were we affecting or hoping to affect consumers, ourselves,
I just wanted to be in
otherwise?
this. I wanted Michigan beer to be in the conversation. Whether you were going to,
And that conversation, you're talking about consumers, like you wanted people buying more Michigan beer.
Yes.
And knowing that we were there.
Talking about it. Instead of going to a party and me bringing beer and explaining to them what I was doing, I wanted somebody else to come in there and bring beer and explain what was going on with Michigan beer. Yeah. And that's eventually where we got to.
Yeah. And so, and your organizations, or your organization, however you want to look at it, between Drew was on inaugural board, you've been heavily involved. Eric Brigham from Rochester's served on the board for a long time.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that arc in terms of where that started, where it went, why, what do you feel was valuable about staying engaged and committing employee hours from your organization for so long?
Many employee hours, years and years of employee hours. And there was times where we were like, God, because it affected it did affect our daily business every once in a while. There might be events where
it seems like you've had a body on the board,
no doubt,
for almost the entire time.
Yep,
if not the entire time.
Since it was conceived, all the way through. And I wasn't on the board. I was on the Government Affairs Committee. But I wasn't on our initial board, but I was involved heavily in the. And
you did guild finances.
Yeah, the green mead days of the first festivals. Yeah,
I
with
remember
the tornadoes.
Hunkered down in the foxhole, counting the little bit of cash we did have come in.
Yeah, you need any event that it was an event-driven guild. So any event that we did back then, we needed bodies. So what would we do? We'd go to our own staff. And so, some places would do it more than others. And it was purely the places that weren't involved. It wasn't because they probably weren't able, they were not able to afford to be able to have that person take some time off. We were fortunate. Our pubs did very well all the way through, so we were able to do that. If we were struggling, I'm sure it would be a different story.
Yeah, you might have pulled back.
Yeah, you never know.
I say that partly because I think there's both sides of it. So I hear that generosity of saying, hey, we can afford to put some hours towards this and we believe in the mission, so let's do it. And not worry about somebody who may not be able to. But on the other hand, do you feel your businesses gained from that involvement? Do you feel it helped contribute to your people's sort of awareness and business acumen? Like if you were talking to another brewery who was gauging whether it was worth the time to be on the board, for instance, just hypothetical. What are the takeaways that you might have gained from that service?
The awareness, you can't say directly that it helped me in to get to X amount of barrels or helped me to get to this amount of income annually. Overall, the whole lake was just filling up and everybody was going up. So to try to say whether or not if we didn't get involved, if it would have not made us successful or not, I don't know if that's necessarily true or not. The biggest thing that I think I could see is that over time, the guild was consistent. They were consistent on their festivals. They were consistent on everything that they did as a group and executed it flawlessly. So when you have that...
Well, I don't know about flawless.
Well, okay. Well,
we know about the flaws here and there.
All right,
but
well,
I hear you.
But you would get a few members that might voice their concern about where is my money going to?
Yeah.
Why But ultimately, that's about as far as it would go. It would never go any further than a meeting where they would feel like their funds weren't going to something.
Yeah, it got
right.
answered.
Yes.
Even if it was uncomfortable at times, I think that's been a constant conversation of what are we doing and why this or why that or the other thing. And I do feel like that's been a hallmark, is that we've always had transparency and answers.
Yes.
And you may not like the answer,
yeah,
but you're going to get one.
At the end of the day, it works.
Yeah.
Which
goes to that whole trust idea.
Yes. Ultimately, that's what it was about, was, all right, we're going to put time in and we're all going to put money in. We're going to put a little bit of our money into it, as much as we could at the time, to create something bigger than all of us. And it has achieved that.
Well, and I feel like, you started in the brew pub model.
Mm-hmm.
I've often remarked, and I've used you and yourself and Drew as an example, where like we were all getting our asses kicked with our own businesses, right? And so distributing micros might have seen each other at a trade show or at a festival, but there would have been no reason for me to meet you and Drew outside of the guild, because if I was in Royal Oak, I was selling beer to bars, and I was working with a distributor in bars that could sell my beer. I wasn't going to visit a brewery. Well, I might have, out of interest. But I mean, my point is that relationships were developed with people on different parts of the state, and we would have never known each other without this common project. And I think that's such a huge takeaway. I wonder if you had similar thoughts about your connectivity to this greater community when you started with a beer that couldn't leave your four walls.
Right. The pub, brew pub, we could only serve our beer, or we could only have our beer on site. We couldn't distribute it. So, but we were one of the first brew pubs to actually serve other people's beers in Michigan. And we made a commitment to do that.
That's
we
true.
made a commitment to do that. And that was part of the conversation. Was initially some of our members, before we formed as a group, were concerned, should we have two separate groups? And Drew's and our concern was, well, we're promoting Michigan-made beer. We make beer on site. This is when we had our pub concept out there. But we also explained to them that, we can help you by selling our beer, or selling your beer too, even though you can't do it. But ultimately, everybody will gain from it, because it's back then it was more about the education of the consumer about the product, that you could get these products in Michigan.
Yeah, and you're right, and so that also makes sense in terms of the whole. It sort of matches your overall ethos that you are bringing people together, whether it was in your pubs or whether it was joining a guild or what have you. That your collective effort often had some element of singing that bigger message.
Yeah, we'd have our brewers dinners, and we'd invite other microbreweries that were only able to distribute into our brewers dinners.
And you had a beer festival. What was the winter beer festival?
Polar Beer Festival.
Polar Beer Festival. You still do that?
No.
Oh, I guess that's all changed a little bit too.
No, so. Now that we distribute now.
Yeah.
It's a little different.
It's a little different.
Yeah.
But I remember going to that, and when did you start that?
That was in like 90, I want to say 97 or 98, maybe.
It's remarkable. I can't even remember.
Yeah, our first winner of the Polar Beer Festival was Eric Brigman, who is our director of ops for the production brewery right now. Yeah.
It's crazy.
It is. Everything is just, it's completely different, but it feels so like this is the way it was supposed to be,
Well, that's a great opportunity to kind of talk about, to shift gears from like those things that we saw come together and the things that brought us together in those early days. How do you think when you reflect on today's marketplace and today's community of breweries, what's important for people to pay attention to now, and what is the call to action in terms of staying together for a healthy brewing community?
What drives me nuts and what doesn't drive me nuts?
Sure. But I mean, I'm just saying, okay, everything's a little different, some things are the same, but what's the relevance and why is it important to stay together as an organization and as a family or community?
I think if we go back to the original meeting, there was conversation about, and it was Larry Bell that brought this up. He's like, I think we need to have better quality control. I think we need to police each other. We need to talk to each other about the quality of our products. Back then it was easier when you only had 15 of us. We could call each other. We could, cell phones were not that prevalent back then, but yeah, we would call each other and say, hey, I tasted this and it tastes a little off to me, and in the
wasn't always an easy conversation. But they did happen.
Yes, in the egos, but you trusted that person because you might have said something to them at some point, and hopefully they give you a proper feedback at that time. Now I see see a lot of people rushing to get into the business and not necessarily figuring out, okay, laying down the foundation of making sure that everything is done right. On the beer side of things, to me, that's extremely important. Where is their brewery? Does it exist? Is it a pot on a stove behind the wall? Those types of things, to me, that's important. Take the brewery out of the kitchen and put it into a professional environment and treat it like it's something that it should be treated as. And the feedback from other people doesn't come across like your beer tastes like crap. It's more about, all right, let me help you out a little bit.
Well, and there is development to figuring out how to provide the feedback as well as how to take it.
No doubt.
Like, both are a skill. And,
no doubt.
And any craftsperson, any artist, we aren't born with the skill to do those things well.
No.
So you have to go through the arc of doing it poorly. I feel like from a maturing point of view.
No, yes.
Because the first time you make something you're really proud, and the first time you hear somebody say it's not great, it hurts.
Yes.
You have to go through that.
Yeah.
It'll probably hurt every time, but you get better at turning that hurt into fuel, I think.
Yeah. And with the amount of beers that are out there, you're more than likely you're going to get a better beer, but every once in a while it does exist, and I'm wondering how many people that's how I think I was. Back then, our whole goal was not to turn off a consumer. We wanted to turn on a consumer. So by thwarting off the possibilities of a batch that didn't necessarily taste well or taste good, to me that was extremely important. Nowadays, there is a lot of other ones.
Right, but I also hear you saying that, hey, same as it ever was, the quality bar where we are on that continuum may be different, but the differentiation point and the reality of how we could lose customers remains the same as it was in the 90s.
No doubt.
Meaning we may be at, this new level, but not making the mark is still what erodes customer base, just like in the 90s when we were at a different mark. And
we really don't want to give big beer or other beers a chance to beat us up.
Right, and to point at, well, that's what's going to happen when you go to these little holes in the wall. Like, they've always found the chink in the armor and beat at it.
Yes.
And so we've got to continually
When you're
develop,
highlighted, they come after you even more.
Yeah, right. So we got to continually be prepared.
Yes.
For criticism.
Yeah, and I think that you got a lot of colleges that are getting into brewing science and stuff like that. I think that that's all great. So I think quality should eventually meet the overall production level.
And do you feel that coming together and things like the conference and things like just strengthening relationships, do you think that helps make that awareness stronger and the response to quality better as a group?
The Guild's conferences are phenomenal. Where they came from back in the day where we would just get together and
I know. Just kidding.
Yeah. Well, all right. I won't go on that.
No, you go anywhere you want.
It was let's just say that the level of professionalism has increased as we've grown as a guild,
absolutely.
and the conferences are phenomenal. They've come so far, and we participate every year. We bring as many of our employees as we can to make sure that they really get what this is all about.
Yeah. And what do you? I imagine so. You've been involved with, I believe, 3 brewing operations all told, maybe more.
Well, 3: Royal Oak, Rochester, Detroit Beer Company, and then Rochester Production Brewery.
Right.
I don't have Royal Oak or Detroit anymore.
Understood. So you have seen how a brewery can contribute to a community, and I'm sure that you have your own sort of perspective on that. And I wonder if I could ask, both combined with those community experiences and then looking at the industry as a whole, can you reflect on how does our overall Michigan community or just community at large, how do they benefit by having a healthy brewing community? What's better because there's a good brewing industry that's getting along and working together? Does that make things better outside of the brewing community?
It was a whole new economy, a whole new way to earn an income. We've got 140 employees between the 2 operations, and that's been consistent for the last 20 years. So, you've got people that might have come from another industry or another type of business that have been with us for 15, 17 years, maybe even longer, some of them. They're providing income for their families. Everything about it is their kids are growing up, and my kids grew up in the brewery, so they don't know anything other than that. We did. It was completely different for us. We were getting into it because it was, this is new, it's fun, it's different. But ultimately, it's creating a community. The Rochester Mills Beer Company, we have an Oktoberfest, 10,000 people come every year. It's crazy.
Wow.
And the community looks forward to it every year. It's our big fundraiser for Make-A-Wish and a couple other organizations, and it's important to them. They rely on that. And we do a number of charity functions every year, and these charities, they make a point to call us a few months ahead of time. Like, is this still going on? We want to make sure that, we can count on your donation. Absolutely. So it's extremely important for your community to support your local brewery. It's not just about drinking beer. It's about jobs. It's about, creating a great environment for families to enjoy themselves.
Yeah, I agree. So kind of wrapping up, do you have thoughts or sage words of advice in terms of engagement and involvement for a brewery that's open in the last 5 years? What's the invitation for them to get involved and kind of be a joiner?
Anytime somebody says I want to open up a brewery, I'm like, listen, you got to figure out a way to get involved with the guild in some fashion. Whether it's you come as an enthusiast and you come around, you talk to us because you get in an hour early, so you get a chance to talk to the founders or the decision makers. Knowledge is power. We know that. Ultimately, the more you can learn about the industry before you get into it, the better off. It's going to save you money. I always, not chuckle, but the people that are like, I got this, I can do it myself. It all ends up costing them 4 or 5 times more than it would have if they would have spent some time with us and talked to us. And that's really what the guild is about, and
that doesn't even
sharing
count the
information.
Heartache. There's the money, and then the heartache attached to it.
The heartache can put people out of business. I can tell we don't have enough time to talk about those people. Right. But ultimately, the people that you want to either, if you want to beat us in some way, if that's in your mind, if you want to be that guy, I'm going to be better than these guys, the whole group of the guild, you still got to learn what we're doing. So why not come around and hang out with us? We share information. It's nothing that we're not going to hold everything like this.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks for everything you've done for the community and for sitting with us.
You too, Fred. I appreciate it.
Thanks. It's good stuff.
Cheers.
You're right. We don't have enough time for all the stories.
No, we don't.
You got to make time. Some good times, though. Dodging tornadoes in the bunker.
That whole thing was crazy.
Thanks for listening and sharing while supporting Michigan breweries and craft beer everywhere. The Michigan Brewers Guild was formed in 1997 with its first summer beer festival taking place in July of 1998. Its now 5 annual festivals are dedicated exclusively to Michigan beer brewed by more than 270 member breweries. The Michigan Brewers Guild exists to promote and protect the passionate Michigan beer industry in every way possible. To learn more, visit us at mibeer.com or say hello on one of our social media pages, as we love hearing from you. From coast to coast, from far and near, let's drink Michigan beer.